Let us move now from the crowded streets of the medieval city into the halls of power. Where once you imagined yourself as an ordinary townsman, we now turn our eyes toward the throne of England and the young king who once sat upon it. His name was Richard II. Richard was not born to rule in ordinary times. He came into the world in 1367 in the city of Bordeaux while it was still under English control. He was the grandson of the great King Edward III, whose reign had carried England into the long and difficult conflict we now call the 100 Years' War. From the very beginning, Richard's life was touched by grandeur and by fragility. His father was the celebrated Edward, known as the Black Prince, a warrior of unmatched reputation. But the Black Prince was gravely ill by the time Richard was still a child, and he died when the boy was only 10. Soon after, the old King Edward III also passed away. And so, in the year 1377, Richard, not yet an adolescent, ascended to the throne of England. Imagine the weight of a crown upon the head of a child, the halls around him filled with advisors, uncles, courtiers, each with their own ambitions and their own counsel. The kingdom itself was restless. Wars abroad strained its coffers, while discontent simmered at home. In these early years, Richard leaned heavily on the guidance of his counselors, but even as a boy, he displayed a strong sense of dignity and majesty. Chroniclers often remarked on his appearance, tall with fine features and a keen awareness of his own station. One of the defining moments of his young reign came only 4 years later, in 1381, during what has come to be known as the Peasants' Revolt. Discontent with high taxes and years of hardship had driven thousands of ordinary people into rebellion. They gathered in London, storming buildings, threatening the court, and demanding change. It was here that Richard, still only 14 years old, revealed a rare kind of composure. Standing before the furious crowd, he spoke to them directly. He spoke with calm assurance, promising reforms, pledging to hear their grievances. For a moment, it seemed that his words carried enough weight to soothe the unrest. Many believed that this was the moment when Richard truly became a king. But as years passed, the promise of that youthful courage gave way to a different reality. Richard's reign grew more troubled. He began to rule with a sense of absolute authority, insisting on the majesty of his crown and bristling at any opposition. His court became known for its refinement, its art, its pageantry, its attention to ritual, but also for its extravagance. Taxes were raised, favorites were promoted, and resentment deepened among the nobles. By the 1390s, Richard's rule was increasingly unstable. His cousin, Henry of Bolingbroke, the son of John of Gaunt, grew in influence. Henry was ambitious, careful, and determined. Tensions between the two men grew until Richard made a fateful decision. He exiled Henry, stripped him of his inheritance, and sought to strengthen his own grasp on the throne. But fortune can change quickly. When John of Gaunt died, Richard seized his estates for the crown. Henry returned in defiance, landing with an army. Support for Richard crumbled swiftly. Nobles who once bowed to him now sided with his rival. Richard, unprepared for such betrayal, found himself abandoned. In the year 1399, Richard II was deposed. He was taken into custody, forced to abdicate, and confined within Pontefract Castle. What precisely happened to him there remains a matter of quiet speculation. Most accounts agree that he died in captivity the following year, in 1400. Some suggest he starved, deliberately or by neglect. Others claim he was quietly killed. Whatever the truth, his reign ended not with triumph, but with silence, far from the majesty he once insisted upon. Imagine then the contrast. A boy who once calmed a furious mob with his words, ending his days alone in a cold stone keep. A king who demanded reverence for his crown, undone by the ambitions of his own cousin. Richard's story is not one of great victories on the battlefield, nor of lasting reforms. It is the story of a fragile throne, of a monarchy struggling to define itself in a turbulent age, and of a man whose youth promised brilliance, but whose later years revealed the limits of power when it is wielded without restraint. And so Richard II passed into history. A king remembered more for the drama of his downfall than for the strength of his rule. His life reminds us of the instability of medieval power and the fleeting nature of majesty in a time when loyalty could shift with the wind. As we leave his story behind, let the memory of Richard's crown rest quietly in the background, like a faded echo of ceremony. And let us move forward toward another mystery of the medieval age.
We leave behind the troubled reign of Richard II and turn now to a different kind of story. Not of one king, but of an entire brotherhood. A brotherhood that once stood at the very center of medieval power, and then, almost suddenly, seemed to vanish. The Knights Templar. The order began in the early 12th century. A group of knights, deeply devoted, swore themselves to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. At first, they were few in number, humble, even poor. Their first quarters were in part of the old Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, from which they drew their name. But over time, the Templars grew. They fought in the Crusades, they trained relentlessly, and they became known for their discipline and bravery. And yet, it was not only on the battlefield that they found power. The order became wealthy. Pilgrims entrusted them with money for safekeeping, and in time, the Templars developed one of the first systems of banking in Europe. Imagine the great castles they built. Strongholds with thick walls, heavy gates, and towers that rose high above the landscape. These were not only military bases, but also centers of administration, where records were kept and wealth was guarded. By the 13th century, the Templars were powerful indeed. Too powerful, some thought. Their lands stretched across Europe and the Middle East. Kings borrowed from them. Merchants entrusted them with treasures. The order was exempt from many local laws, answering directly to the Pope himself. And then, as quickly as their rise, came their fall. In the year 1307, King Philip IV of France turned against them. He was deeply in debt to the Templars, and perhaps feared their influence. On a single day in October, his agents struck. Across France, Templars were arrested. Their leaders were accused of heresy, of secret rituals, of crimes whispered but never clearly proven. The charges were dark, but evidence was uncertain. Many today believe the accusations were a pretext, a way for Philip to erase his debts and seize their wealth. Over the next years, the order was dismantled. Trials were held. Some Templars confessed under pressure. Others resisted. By 1312, the Pope had officially disbanded the order. Its leaders, including the Grand Master Jacques de Molay, were executed. And here begins the mystery. What became of the Templars' immense treasure? Contemporaries believed they held vast stores of gold, relics, and documents. But when their castles were seized, little was found. Some said the wealth had been moved in secret. Others claimed that the Templars' treasure was less material and more spiritual, knowledge, relics, or even secrets too dangerous to reveal. Legends grew. Stories told of wagons rolling out of Paris by night, loaded with chests, bound for hidden locations. Some imagined treasure buried deep beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Others suggested it was spirited away to Scotland, to be guarded in secrecy. Still others linked the Templars to myths of the Holy Grail or the Ark of the Covenant. Of course, historians remain cautious. It is possible that much of the supposed treasure was exaggerated or spent long before the order fell. Yet the absence of clear records, combined with the dramatic end of the Templars, left a space for imagination. And into that space, centuries of mystery have flowed. Today, ruins of their fortresses still stand across Europe and the Middle East. Silent stones, weathered by centuries, holding whatever truths they once knew. Step into one and you may find a vaulted chamber, cool and dim. Carvings of crosses still etched into walls. Empty recesses where chests might once have been stored. A reminder that what was once so powerful can, in time, become a hushed echo. For those who like to dream, the treasure of the Templars may still be out there, resting quietly, hidden away. For others, the true treasure lies in their story, the rise of a brotherhood, the sudden fall, and the enduring mystery that refuses to fade. And as we leave behind the Templars, their cloaks of white and red, fading like a banner in the wind, we turn now to a different side of the medieval world. A world not of soldiers or kings, but of noblewomen, whose lives reveal another layer of the medieval city.
We have walked the narrow streets of the medieval city. We have listened to the story of a king undone by his own power. And we have wandered through the mystery of the Knights Templar. Now, let us step into a quieter, more refined world. A place of tapestries, carved wooden furniture, and long corridors of stone. The world of the medieval noble lady. Imagine yourself waking in a chamber within a great manor, or perhaps a castle. The walls are thick, designed to protect against storm and siege alike. The windows are small, their glass a luxury not always present. Instead, oiled cloth may cover the opening, letting in a softened, filtered light. Your bed is far grander than the straw mattress of the townsfolk. A heavy wooden frame with ropes stretched tight to hold a thick mattress stuffed with wool or feathers. Curtains hang from the canopy, both to give privacy and to keep out drafts. When you rise, the air is cool, even in summer, for castles are seldom warm. Servants attend you, helping to dress you in layers of linen, wool, and sometimes silk. Colors are carefully chosen, for dyes are costly, and rich hues display status. Jewelry might be fastened, a brooch, a chain, a ring set with a stone. The weight of these items is light compared to the weight of expectation. A noble lady is always observed, always measured by the grace with which she carries herself. Breakfast is modest. Bread, cheese, perhaps a cup of warm ale or watered wine. Meals are not hurried. Conversation might flow in gentle tones, while outside the day begins with the bustle of servants, horses, and messengers. The hours that follow are filled with duties. A noble lady does not toil in fields or shops, but her responsibilities are no less real. She oversees the running of the household, ordering supplies, directing servants, ensuring that food, clothing, and provisions are properly managed. She must know how to keep accounts, to manage estates in her husband's absence, and to maintain the reputation of the family. Leisure is also part of her day, though it is often purposeful. Embroidery is more than pastime. It is craft and expression. Delicate stitches bring forth patterns of flowers, animals, or sacred scenes. Reading may be possible, if she has been taught, though books are rare and precious, often in Latin or French. Music fills the chambers too. A lute, a harp, or the steady sound of voices in song. Beyond these walls lies the greater duty of marriage. For noblewomen, unions are rarely matters of personal choice. They are alliances, carefully arranged to bind families together, to secure land, wealth, or political influence. A young noblewoman may find herself wed to a man decades older, or sent to a distant estate far from the place she once called home. Motherhood is central. The bearing of children is expected and often frequent. Yet it is fraught with risk. The comforts of nobility cannot always shield against the dangers of childbirth or the illnesses that sweep through halls as they do through towns. A noble lady's life, though privileged, is never free from shadow. Evenings bring gatherings, a great hall filled with flickering torchlight, long tables spread with meats, stews, breads, and sweetmeats. Jesters or musicians provide gentle entertainment. The noble lady sits among her peers, her place determined by rank, her manners observed by all. Here she must balance grace with caution, speaking enough to be engaging, but never too freely to invite scandal. And when the hall grows quiet again, and the castle settles into the stillness of night, she returns to her chamber. The heavy door closes, the curtains are drawn around the bed, and within those stone walls, in the silence broken only by the wind, she rests. A day in the life of a medieval noble lady is one of contrasts, surrounded by luxuries unimaginable to most, yet constrained by duty and expectation. A life lived within walls both protective and confining. A rhythm steady, deliberate, and deeply bound to family, to faith, and to the fragile balance of power. And as we reflect on her world, we see another face of the medieval age. Not only hardship in the streets, not only mystery in the cloisters, not only kings upon their thrones, but the quieter endurance of women whose lives shaped households, families, and, in their own way, the course of history itself.
Perfect. Let's bring the journey to a close with a gentle, reflective conclusion that eases the listener into rest. And so, our walk through the medieval city draws to an end. We began among the crowded streets, where life was harsh and unrelenting. We followed a young king, Richard II, from his hopeful beginnings to his quiet downfall. We considered the mystery of the Knights Templar, whose treasure may never be fully known. And we stepped into the world of noblewomen, where duty, grace, and quiet strength defined each passing day. The medieval world was many things at once. It was noisy and crowded, yet also solemn and reverent. It was filled with hardship, but also with rituals, beauty, and a sense of shared faith.
For those who lived within its walls, the rhythm of daily life was steady, familiar, a cycle of work, prayer, and rest. As you listen now, perhaps in the quiet of your own room, you may notice the contrast. Where their nights were often cold, yours is warm. Where their food was scarce and plain, yours is plentiful and varied. Where their lives were bound to survival, you are free to drift, to imagine, to rest without fear. History, in this way, offers perspective. It reminds us of how far the world has changed and how deeply human lives have always been shaped by place, by time, and by circumstance. So, as you settle deeper into your pillow, allow these images of the past to fade softly into the background. The echo of footsteps on cobblestones, the toll of a distant church bell, the rustle of silk within a noble chamber. Let them become gentle, distant, like a lullaby of time itself. The medieval city never truly slept, but you may now let yourself drift. Rest, knowing that the past is far away and the present is here, calm and safe. Good night.
Welcome, and thank you for settling in. Today, we will embark on a slow, meandering journey along the banks of the Nile, tracing the rhythms of life in ancient Egypt. Imagine yourself waking to the soft, golden light of dawn spilling across a village of mud brick homes. The air is thick with the scent of the river, mingling with the warmth of the sun and the faint aroma of cooking grains. In this journey, we will explore what it was truly like to live in one of history's most enduring civilizations. We will look beyond the monumental pyramids, the awe-inspiring temples, and the hieroglyphs that still whisper across millennia. We will step gently into the everyday, the human, and the quietly fascinating aspects of life. The labor, the rituals, the simple pleasures, and the small struggles. Through 4 distinct segments, we will immerse ourselves in daily life, follow the paths of notable figures, unravel some lingering mysteries, and contrast the lives of commoners with those who walked among the elite. The rhythm will be steady, the narrative unhurried, and the focus softly illuminating the textures of the past. Allow yourself to drift along with the current of the Nile, letting history wash over you in a gentle, measured cadence.
Now imagine yourself walking slowly through the sunlit courtyards of Amarna, the city that rises from the sands as if it had always been part of the desert itself. The air carries the warmth of the sun-baked mud and the faint scent of oils and incense from nearby temples. Here you are not a farmer, but a witness to the quiet ambition and curiosity of a pharaoh who sought to reshape the spiritual world around him. Akhenaten, once known as Amenhotep IV, is a figure of both fascination and calm intensity. From the moment he ascended to the throne, he sought to guide Egypt along a new path. Rather than adhering to the long-established pantheon of gods, he chose to focus worship on Aten, the sun disk, the giver of light and life. His vision was unique, a gentle insistence that the divine could be singular yet omnipresent, like the sun itself. Imagine him moving through the palace corridors with Nefertiti by his side, her presence both elegant and commanding. She is not merely a consort, but a partner in this unfolding experiment of devotion. Together they oversee rituals that differ from tradition, prayers offered in open courtyards where the sunlight falls evenly upon all who gather. Every morning, the rhythm of devotion begins anew, soft chants rising, hands lifted in quiet reverence. The challenges of their reign are subtle but persistent. Traditional priests, bound by centuries of ritual, view this singular worship with suspicion. Nobles accustomed to influence through the old temples adjust reluctantly, their quiet frustrations lingering like shadows along the palace walls. Yet Akhenaten and Nefertiti persist, moving with a serene determination, crafting art and architecture that reflect their vision, elongated forms, intimate family depictions, and temples open to the sky, where light itself seems to caress the stone. Life at court carries both the ordinary and the extraordinary. Nefertiti, with her graceful gestures and calm authority, guides the education of their children, overseeing the scribes and artisans who translate vision into marble, pigment, and gold. Akhenaten, while distant from the daily grind of common life, moves among his people in careful observation, measuring the impact of his reforms, adjusting ceremonies, and ensuring the daily rhythms of the city flow smoothly. Yet even in this seat of power, uncertainty quietly lingers. The winds of history are unpredictable. Beyond the palace, the Nile continues its timeless course, indifferent to human ambition. The city of Amarna, carefully planned and meticulously maintained, rests on the fragile hope that this new vision will endure. You can almost sense the quiet tension, a gentle reminder that even the grandest plans are subject to time and circumstance. During moments of rest, you might imagine the pharaoh and queen walking along the terrace as the sun lowers in the sky, casting long shadows over sandstone walls. The glow of evening softens the stark lines of power, revealing the tender interactions between ruler and family, between the ambitious and the ordinary. These subtle details, the glance, the gesture, the soft-spoken words, form the gentle pulse of daily life at the very heart of Egypt's experiment in devotion. And as the night descends upon Amarna, you can picture lamps being lit in the palace chambers, the faint flicker of flame illuminating delicate frescoes. The rhythm of life continues, calm yet purposeful, steady yet filled with quiet complexity. This is the story of rulers who sought to reshape the spiritual landscape, whose ambitions intertwined with the textures of daily life, and whose legacy endures in the whispers of stone and paint.
Now, imagine yourself stepping quietly into the golden silence of a tomb, the air still and faintly cool, filled with the faint scent of aged wood and resin. You are not rushing, but moving slowly, your steps measured, as though each movement is part of a quiet meditation. This is the resting place of Tutankhamun, the boy king, whose life was brief, yet whose legacy has captured the curiosity of countless generations. Tutankhamun ascended the throne at a young age, following the radical reforms of Akhenaten. The world around him was one of transition, a delicate balance of old traditions and new visions. And yet, his reign was short, ending at just 18 or 19 years of age. Scholars have long debated what led to his untimely death, and the mystery is as gentle as it is compelling, a puzzle suspended in time. Some suggest an illness, a quiet vulnerability that was part of the rhythm of life in ancient Egypt. Others propose an accident, perhaps a fall from a chariot, a momentary slip that altered the course of history. There are even whispers of intrigue and familial tension, though these remain uncertain, like faint echoes in a vast desert. As you imagine these possibilities, notice how the mind drifts between certainty and speculation, the gentle pull of curiosity lulling you into contemplation.
The tomb itself is a world frozen in careful arrangement. Golden masks, delicate jewelry, painted chests, and ritual objects are laid out with precision, each artifact a quiet note in a larger symphony of remembrance. You can picture the artisans at work, their hands steady and meticulous, shaping each piece not in haste, but with deliberate care, honoring both the boy king and the traditions that preceded him. As you move slowly through this imagined space, consider the significance of these objects. Each tells a story of reverence, of belief in the afterlife, of the desire to preserve identity and memory. Even the smallest amulet, the tiniest painted figure, carries with it the weight of centuries, a soft whisper of care and devotion. This is history at its most intimate. Not the battles or the politics, but the quiet attention given to ensuring that life, though fleeting, was honored and remembered. The mystery of Tutankhamun's death reminds us that life, even for those in positions of prominence, is fragile. Yet within that fragility lies fascination, a gentle intrigue that invites reflection. Imagine the scholars and archaeologists of later generations uncovering these treasures, piecing together clues with patience and care, each fragment a soft echo from the past. The tomb is silent, yet it speaks in subtle ways, of family, of devotion, of the rhythms of life and death in a civilization that has long since faded from sight, but not from memory. And as you let your mind wander through these quiet halls, consider the broader perspective, a civilization that endured for millennia, shaped by rivers, sun, and sand, by rulers and farmers alike. Tutankhamun's life, though brief though it was, becomes a gentle lens through which to contemplate the cycles of history, the impermanence of life, and the soft, persistent pulse of human endeavor across time.
Now, imagine yourself slowly approaching the grand palace of a pharaoh, where the sunlight glimmers off limestone walls and the gentle rustle of palm trees sways in the warm breeze. Here, life takes on a different rhythm, one of measured luxury, careful ceremony, and subtle exertions of power. The sounds are softer, the spaces broader, the air carrying faint perfumes of lotus and myrrh. In the palace, servants move quietly through the corridors, carrying water in delicate jars or arranging offerings on stone altars. You can imagine the soft clatter of sandals on polished floors, the muted laughter of children playing in shaded courtyards, and the occasional low murmur of advisors speaking in hushed tones. The environment is carefully curated, designed to display the stability and grandeur of the pharaoh's rule. Yet it is not without its quiet demands. Meals are elaborate, yet soothing. Imagine trays of bread, fruits, and dates arranged with precision, fish grilled over gentle embers, and honey-sweetened pastries that glimmer under the sun. The preparation itself is a rhythmic process, repeated daily, echoing the care and consistency that define palace life. Every object has a place, every action a subtle purpose, creating a world that is calm, ordered, and deliberate. Beyond the tangible comforts, there is the structured flow of duties and rituals. Pharaohs would rise with the sun, receive homage from officials, and perform rituals designed to honor the gods and maintain cosmic order. Yet, despite the apparent formality, the pace is steady, measured, almost meditative. The rituals themselves are gentle repetitions, chants and gestures performed with calm precision, a quiet reflection of the harmony that the pharaoh seeks to project across the land. In the private chambers, the pharaoh and family might enjoy quiet moments of reflection or leisure. Nefertiti or other consorts might engage in gentle conversation, while music,
soft and soothing, fills the rooms with a sense of serenity. The walls are adorned with painted scenes of daily life, divine interactions and celebrations, each image a reminder of continuity, tradition, and the gentle flow of time.
Hey guys, tonight we're going to travel back, way back, to ancient Mesopotamia, where the first scribes began their long, ink-free, clay-covered careers. Picture it? The air is warm, the riverbanks smell of damp reeds, and every surface seems to be coated in a thin layer of dust that no broom has ever conquered. You're standing in the middle of a bustling settlement, a few thousand years before Netflix, before pizza delivery, before even the idea of socks as we know them. You're here to learn what it felt like to live the life of a Babylonian scribe. Spoiler: it's a lot less glamorous than it sounds, and you probably wouldn't survive the first week, unless you really enjoy clay dust permanently embedded in your fingernails. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling generous, drop your location and local time down in the comments. I love knowing where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by squinting against the early morning sun, which is already bouncing off the mud brick walls around you. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers are never far, which means the air carries that earthy, watery smell of silt. Somewhere in the distance, a goat is bleating in a voice that sounds suspiciously like your uncle calling you for dinner. You brush it off and step into the dusty streets of Babylon. Or, depending on the century, perhaps Ur or Uruk. Cities here have a knack for springing up and collapsing like sandcastles at high tide. The first thing you notice about scribes is their status. They aren't kings, priests, or warriors, but they hold a quiet power. When the king wants a law recorded, it's the scribe who presses it into clay. When a merchant lends a sack of barley to a neighbor, it's the scribe who notes it down, ensuring nobody forgets later. Historians still argue whether scribes were respected more for their brains or resented for their nitpicky attention to detail. Imagine being the ancient equivalent of that one co-worker who insists on correcting everyone's grammar in emails. The main tool of your trade is not a pen, not ink, but clay. Endless clay. You dig it up, knead it until it's pliable, and flatten it into small, palm-sized tablets. Each one is a little sticky rectangle of potential knowledge, or potential boredom, depending on whether you're writing about epic poetry or sheep rations. Fun fact, some of these tablets are still perfectly readable today. Meanwhile, your modern grocery list from last week has already been lost to the void. Once you've prepared your tablet, you pick up your stylus, a trimmed reed, sharpened into a wedge. You press it into the clay at careful angles, creating lines and triangles. This wedge-shaped writing, cuneiform, is basically the original font. It's not cursive or block letters. It's more like trying to play Tetris with a stick. And yes, you'd better get it right the first time, because erasing means smudging clay with your finger until the whole thing looks like a failed pottery project. The role of the scribe stretches across everything: tax records, religious hymns, kingly decrees, shopping lists, and even the occasional love poem. Your job description is both accountant and novelist, with a dash of bureaucrat. It's like being forced to write receipts all day, only sometimes your receipts turn into literature. And unlike modern office jobs, You don't get a coffee machine, just water jars that may or may not have yesterday's mosquito still floating inside. The great irony, while kings and priests strutted around visibly in ceremonies, it was the scribes who kept their legacies alive. Without someone scratching their names into clay, those rulers would be as forgotten as last week's dream. Yet for all that importance, scribes didn't exactly live like royalty. You weren't driving the latest chariot or feasting on roasted gazelle every night. You probably had a modest mud brick home, a diet heavy on bread, onions, and beer. Yes, beer. It was safer than water, and you might need a mug or two after spending 10 hours counting goats that never stayed still long enough to tally. Here's the quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found school tablets showing practice exercises. Some are covered with neat, careful symbols, but others, not so much. Imagine a 4,000-year-old notebook where a student clearly gave up halfway, carving lazy, crooked wedges like, "Yeah, whatever, I'll just wing it." At least kids haven't changed much. Historians still argue whether these sloppy tablets were tolerated as beginner mistakes or if the teacher marched the student outside for a good scolding and maybe a chore involving an extra heavy water jug. Hey guys, tonight we're going to travel back, way back to ancient Mesopotamia, where the first scribes began their long, ink-free, clay-covered careers. Picture it. The air is warm, the riverbanks smell of damp reeds, and every surface seems to be coated in a thin layer of dust that no broom has ever conquered. You're standing in the middle of a bustling settlement, a few thousand years before Netflix, before pizza delivery, before even the idea of socks as we know them. You're here to learn what it felt like to live the life of a Babylonian scribe. Spoiler: it's a lot less glamorous than it sounds, and you probably wouldn't survive the first week, unless you really enjoy clay dust permanently embedded in your fingernails. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling generous, drop your location and local time down in the comments. I love knowing where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by squinting against the early morning sun, which is already bouncing off the mud brick walls around you. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers are never far, which means the air carries that earthy, watery smell of silt. Somewhere in the distance, a goat is bleating in a voice that sounds suspiciously like your uncle calling you for dinner. You brush it off and step into the dusty streets of Babylon. Or, depending on the century, perhaps Ur or Uruk. Cities here have a knack for springing up and collapsing like sandcastles at high tide. The first thing you notice about scribes is their status. They aren't kings, priests, or warriors, but they hold a quiet power. When the king wants a law recorded, it's the scribe who presses it into clay. When a merchant lends a sack of barley to a neighbor, it's the scribe who notes it down, ensuring nobody forgets later. Historians still argue whether scribes were respected more for their brains or resented for their nitpicky attention to detail. Imagine being the ancient equivalent of that one co-worker who insists on correcting everyone's grammar in emails. The main tool of your trade is not a pen, not ink, but clay. Endless clay. You dig it up, knead it until it's pliable, and flatten it into small, palm-sized tablets. Each one is a little sticky rectangle of potential knowledge, or potential boredom, depending on whether you're writing about epic poetry or sheep rations. Fun fact, some of these tablets are still perfectly readable today. Meanwhile, your modern grocery list from last week has already been lost to the void. Once you've prepared your tablet, you pick up your stylus, a trimmed reed, sharpened into a wedge. You press it into the clay at careful angles, creating lines and triangles. This wedge-shaped writing, cuneiform, is basically the original font. It's not cursive or block letters. It's more like trying to play Tetris with a stick. And yes, you'd better get it right the first time, because erasing means smudging clay with your finger until the whole thing looks like a failed pottery project. The role of the scribe stretches across everything: tax records, religious hymns, kingly decrees, shopping lists, and even the occasional love poem. Your job description is both accountant and novelist, with a dash of bureaucrat. It's like being forced to write receipts all day, only sometimes your receipts turn into literature. And unlike modern office jobs, you don't get a coffee machine, just water jars that may or may not have yesterday's mosquito still floating inside. The great irony: while kings and priests strutted around visibly in ceremonies, it was the scribes who kept their legacies alive. Without someone scratching their names into clay, those rulers would be as forgotten as last week's dream. Yet for all that importance, scribes didn't exactly live like royalty. You weren't driving the latest chariot or feasting on roasted gazelle every night. You probably had a modest mud brick home, a diet heavy on bread, onions, and beer. Yes, beer. It was safer than water, and you might need a mug or two after spending 10 hours counting goats that never stayed still long enough to tally. Here's the quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found school tablets showing practice exercises. Some are covered with neat, careful symbols, but others, not so much. Imagine a 4,000-year-old notebook where a student clearly gave up halfway, carving lazy, crooked wedges like, "Yeah, whatever, I'll just wing it." At least kids haven't changed much. Historians still argue whether these sloppy tablets were tolerated as beginner mistakes, or if the teacher marched the student outside for a good scolding and maybe a chore involving an extra heavy water jug. You walk through a courtyard where other scribes sit hunched over, scratching away. The sound is faint but constant, the soft tap-tap of stylus into clay. It's oddly soothing, like rain hitting a window, except instead of raindrops, it's thousands of tiny triangles embedding themselves into human history. Every now and then, someone sighs deeply, stretches their back, and mutters something under their breath that you're glad you don't understand. Scribe humor is probably as bad as modern accounting jokes. As the sun climbs, you notice the way light glints off drying tablets laid out on racks. They'll be stored in temple archives, palace storerooms, or shoved under floorboards, waiting for some modern archaeologist to rediscover them millennia later. You picture one of your shopping lists: 2 onions, 3 loaves, 1 jar of beer, being displayed in a glass case at a museum, and you can't help but laugh. Imagine a tourist paying $10 to see your reminder to buy onions. By now, you're starting to understand the peculiar balance of power scribes held. You aren't glamorous, but you are indispensable. Without you, kings can't boast, priests can't collect offerings, and merchants can't cheat each other. You are the human hard drive of your society. And though clay dust coats your hands and your back aches from endless hunching, you also carry a quiet satisfaction. You're literally writing the first pages of history. Of course, whether you'd actually survive this job is another question. Between the endless clay dust, the lack of ergonomic chairs, and the daily risk of sunburn, you'd probably call it quits by lunchtime. But don't worry, you're here only for the story, and there's plenty more of it waiting as your day unfolds in Mesopotamia. You're barely settled into your role as a new Babylonian scribe, before reality sets in. This wasn't a career you just wandered into by accident. Becoming a scribe required years of schooling. And if you thought modern students had it rough, wait until you find yourself in the tablet house, the Adaba, where apprentices learned to carve the written word. You wake at dawn, dragging your tired feet across packed earth, clutching a lump of clay the way a modern student might carry a backpack stuffed with overdue assignments. Inside the Adaba, the air is dry, the walls smell of baked mud, and the teacher, stern as a stone statue, waits with a reed stylus in hand. Not for writing, mind you, but for pointing, correcting, and occasionally smacking the desk for dramatic effect. You sit cross-legged with a dozen other children, each trying not to look too terrified. The first lessons: memorize symbols. Not letters, not even words, but hundreds upon hundreds of wedge-shaped marks, each with its own meaning. Some represent sounds, some whole words, others abstract ideas. It's like learning hieroglyphics, except instead of birds and eyes, you're stuck with combinations of triangles. Your clay tablet, moist and soft, sits in your lap. You press the stylus, trying to make the correct wedge shape, only to realize you've jabbed the clay too deeply. The teacher leans over, frowns, and mutters something under his breath. Congratulations, you've just failed your first assignment. To fix it, you smear the clay flat again, leaving behind a sloppy mess that looks like oatmeal. Modern erasers suddenly feel like a miracle. Apprenticeship wasn't just about copying neat rows of symbols. It was about repetition, endless repetition. You practice writing the word for barley 20 times, then goat, then temple tax. Your wrist aches, your back complains, and your fingers feel like they've been chewing on reeds instead of carving with them. Historians still argue whether apprentices were mostly children of wealthy families, or if talented kids from humbler backgrounds could claw their way in. Either way, one thing's clear: this was no casual hobby. You either committed to years of clay carving drudgery, or you gave up and went back to farming onions in the hot sun. Every now and then, you glance at the other kids. Some are neat freaks, producing elegant little wedges that look almost professional. Others are clearly struggling. One boy nearby has turned his tablet into a chaotic scattering of triangles, like a hedgehog rolled through it. And then there's the prankster who tries to sculpt a doodle of a donkey instead of writing grain. The teacher notices, of course, and suddenly the prankster is tasked with fetching water jars all afternoon. The moral: don't doodle donkeys on your clay homework. And yes, punishments were a real part of this training. Some surviving tablets even contain student complaints, scrawled in frustrated wedges. The teacher hit me, or he punished me with a stick. You can practically hear the ancient equivalent of, "Ugh, I hate this class." At least modern kids can vent on social media. Here, your complaints become archaeological evidence for future generations. Still, there's a rhythm to the day. Morning drills in symbols, short breaks with bread and dates, then back to copying longer texts. Sometimes you're tasked with memorizing proverbs. One tablet lists wisdom like, "A scribe who knows nothing, what is he?" Or, "He who does not listen, his learning will vanish." It's the ancient equivalent of motivational posters, except instead of a sunset and an eagle, you've got clay and wedges. Here's your quirky tidbit for the day. Some teachers apparently made students practice while singing their lines. Imagine chanting "barley, barley, barley" in a sing-song voice, while your classmates echo back like a slightly depressed choir. Whether this actually helped memory or just annoyed everyone is up for debate. Historians still argue whether these chants were central to education or just a quirky habit of one over-enthusiastic teacher. By late afternoon, your fingers are cramped. Your clay tablets are scattered around you like a mini-brick factory, and your brain is swimming with symbols. You sneak a glance at the doorway, where sunlight slants in golden and tempting. Freedom is out there, kids running, goats wandering, a merchant shouting about fresh figs, but nope, you're stuck indoors, scratching triangles into clay, because that's the price of becoming a scribe. The apprenticeship could last years, sometimes a decade or more. You'd advance from simple lists to complex contracts, then finally to literature, epic tales, hymns, myths. Only once you'd proven yourself precise enough to record temple accounts without losing a cow or two would you graduate to the real deal. Until then, you're just another kid covered in clay dust, dreaming of escape. But here's the funny thing. Despite the punishments, the drudgery, the aching knees, many apprentices grew genuinely proud of their skill. To be a scribe was to rise above the fields and the plow. You'd earn status, steady work, and the ability to preserve your civilization's memory. And somewhere in that tired, inkless classroom, you feel a little spark of ambition. If you can just survive a few more years of chanting barley and dodging the teacher's stylus, you'll make it. For now, though, you rub your sore hands, press one last triangle into the clay, and remind yourself, this is just the beginning.
The clay dust clings to your hair and nostrils as you stumble out of the tablet house, still half hearing the echo of your classmates chanting barley in the back of your mind. At last, you get a glimpse of the wider world, the place where your skills will actually matter. The city of Uruk wakes up with you, buzzing with a rhythm that feels both chaotic and oddly familiar, like a farmer's market crossed with rush hour traffic. The morning begins before the sun even clears the horizon. You rise on a reed mat in your family's modest mud brick home. Your mother is already grinding grain with a heavy stone, the steady scrape echoing through the walls. The smell of baking bread drifts in, mingling with the tang of onions sizzling in a small clay pan. Breakfast isn't glamorous, mostly flatbread and watered beer, but it's hearty enough to fuel you through the day. You stretch, rub your stiff shoulders, and mentally prepare for another round of endless lists, tablets, and numbers. Stepping into the street, you're immediately hit by a wall of sound. Donkeys bray in protest as merchants load them with sacks of barley. Potters bang clay jars together, advertising their sturdiness by clanging them like drums. A baker shouts about fresh loaves, and a brewer tempts passers-by with frothy jars of beer. The air smells like a blend of yeast, manure, and smoke, an aroma that might make a modern visitor wrinkle their nose but to you just says, home. Your job as a junior scribe starts early. Today, you're stationed at the temple granary, where carts full of grain roll in from the countryside. Farmers arrive sweaty and dusty, leading donkeys with bulging saddlebags. Each delivery needs to be weighed, counted, and recorded because heaven forbid anyone accidentally forgets how much grain they owe. You settle on a stool, spread a damp tablet across your lap, and begin the tedious but vital process of pressing wedges. The system is precise. Marks for numbers, marks for barley, marks for goats, marks for silver. It's like inventing spreadsheets, except you don't get autofill to copy the formulas down. You press wedge after wedge, listening to farmers argue with the overseer about whether that last basket was full or just a little light. One man insists the donkeys must have eaten some on the way, which sounds suspiciously convenient. You record the official number anyway, scribes aren't here to play detective, just to make the record. Historians still argue whether scribes were completely impartial clerks or if they sometimes played favorites. Maybe you'd write down a generous total if the farmer slipped you a fig or two. Maybe not. Either way, the weight of responsibility rests in your clay-covered hands, and you can't help wondering whether one sloppy wedge could someday lead to a palace audit. By mid-morning, the sun is fierce. Sweat trickles down your back, clay tablets dry too fast in the heat, and your stylus keeps sticking. To keep focus, you chew absently on the end of your reed, the way a modern student gnaws a pencil. The taste is bitter, grassy,
and not at all satisfying, but it beats nodding off in front of the overseer. You wonder if every scribe has teeth marks on their stylus or if it's just your nervous habit. As you work, the temple bell clangs, a heavy bronze ring that carries across the city. Priests in long robes sweep past with solemn faces, carrying baskets of bread and jars of beer as offerings to the gods. You pause for a moment, stylus hovering over clay, watching the procession. The sight is impressive, even moving, but you can't help thinking, someone has to record all that bread and beer, too. And guess who that someone usually is? Yep, scribes again. Here's your quirky tidbit for the morning. Sometimes, when scribes recorded temple rations, they slipped in doodles of animals or exaggerated numbers, almost like inside jokes. Archaeologists have found tablets with unusually fat sheep drawings, leading to speculation that some bored scribe decided to have a little fun. Historians still argue whether these were teaching exercises, acts of humor, or just mistakes. Personally, you like to imagine a grumpy scribe chuckling to himself as he secretly gave a donkey the world's biggest ears. The market outside the temple walls adds its own rhythm to your day. You hear women haggling over spices, shepherds calling out their flocks, and children chasing each other through the crowd. A man selling date syrup nearly collides with a potter balancing a stack of jars, and you can't help but smile at the chaos. It's noisy, messy, alive, and every bit of it somehow ends up in the hands of scribes. By midday, your stomach growls. You trade a quick mark on someone's tally for a crust of bread and a sip of beer. The bread is chewy, the beer thick and almost porridge-like. It fills you up, even if it doesn't exactly taste like fine dining. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve, stretch your legs, and then get back to it, more donkeys, more grain, more clay. The afternoon drags, shadows lengthen, and your stylus hand cramps. You pause to flex your fingers, glance around, and imagine for just a moment what life might be like if you weren't a scribe. Maybe you'd be a farmer, your back bent under the sun. Maybe a potter, your hands shaping jars instead of symbols. But then you remember, those jobs don't carry the same quiet prestige. They don't give you the chance to carve your mark into history, literally. And so, as the sun sets in a blaze of orange and red, you finish your last tablet of the day. You stack it carefully with the others, brush clay dust from your lap, and feel a tired but undeniable pride. You may not be a king or a warrior, but without you, none of them would have a legacy.
Your morning in Uruk might have ended with aching hands and a pile of dusty clay, but the day isn't over yet. As the city slips into its afternoon rhythm, you return to what makes or breaks every scribe, the tools of the trade. Without them, you're just a person staring at lumps of mud. With them, you're a magician turning dirt into memory. First, the stylus. You pick up a fresh reed from the bundle near your workbench. Reeds grow thick along the riverbanks, buzzing with dragonflies and croaking frogs. You slice the reed at an angle with a small knife until the tip is sharp and wedge-shaped. This is your pen, though it feels more like a tiny chisel. The cut has to be just right. Too blunt and your symbols blur. Too sharp and you risk gouging the clay. You test it against your thumb. Perfect. Every scribe swears by his stylus, and you're no exception. Some prefer a wider wedge, others a narrow one. A few obsessive types keep 3 or 4 on hand for different strokes, like artists swapping brushes. You, however, chew on yours like it's a stick of sugarcane, which horrifies your teacher but calms your nerves. The result? Your stylus tip sometimes has tiny teeth marks, an archaeological clue for future generations about your questionable habits. Then comes the clay itself. You scoop it from the riverbank, heavy and cool in your hands. Mixed with just enough water, it becomes pliable, ready to receive the stylus. Too wet and your wedge marks smear. Too dry and the surface cracks before you finish your sentence. You knead the clay, fold it, press it flat, then slap it into a neat tablet shape. It's messy work, and your fingernails are permanently rimmed with gray. Somewhere in the future, people will pay money for spa mud treatments, but for you, it's just another Tuesday. The smell of wet clay lingers everywhere, earthy, slightly sour, like a damp cellar. You smooth the surface, feeling its cool weight in your palms, and there's a strange comfort in the ritual. Historians still argue whether scribes prepared their own tablets every time or if apprentices did most of the grunt work. Either way, you find yourself muttering, would it kill someone to invent paper already? You don't just write on clay tablets, though. Sometimes wax-coated boards or even stone are used for important inscriptions. But clay dominates daily life because it's cheap, abundant, and accidentally durable. Once dried or baked, these tablets outlast almost anything. Fire destroys buildings, floods wash away walls, but those little clay blocks endure. You laugh to yourself. Your to-do list might be around longer than the king's palace. As you settle into your seat, you think about the archives. Whole rooms stacked with tablets, shelves groaning under the weight of recorded grain counts, contracts, and hymns. Walking through one feels like wandering into a mud brick library where every book is heavy, square, and written in triangles. It's impressive, yes, but also a nightmare if you ever misfile a tablet. Imagine needing one specific receipt from 3 years ago and having to sift through piles of clay blocks. You suspect some poor apprentice is still looking. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some scribes carved practice tablets shaped like little lentils, no bigger than your palm. Archaeologists find them scattered like ancient stress balls. You imagine a student fiddling with one in class, tossing it in the air, then hastily scribbling on it when the teacher walks past. Historians still argue whether these mini tablets were genuine exercises or just toys. Either way, they'd fit neatly in your pocket if Mesopotamian tunics had pockets, which sadly they don't. The tools also shape your body. After years of pressing reeds into clay, your fingers develop calluses, your knuckles ache, and your posture becomes a permanent hunch. You rub your shoulders, trying to straighten your spine, but the relief never lasts. There's a joke among scribes. We write the laws that straighten others, but none that straighten us. It gets a polite chuckle every time, mostly because everyone is too tired to laugh properly. The sun dips lower, shadows linger across the workshop, and you're still at it, preparing tablets, sharpening reeds, carefully stacking your day's work. The steady rhythm of press, lift, becomes almost meditative. You slip into a trance, half aware of your surroundings, the drone of insects outside, the creak of a door, the faint laughter of children playing in the street. In that quiet repetition, you almost forget your aching back. Almost. Sometimes you wonder if anyone will ever read these tablets again. Will your neat wedge marks sit forgotten in a temple cellar? Or will someone centuries later find them, brush away the dust, and marvel at your perfect barley symbol? The thought both comforts and unnerves you. It's like whispering into the future with no idea who will listen. At last you read phrase, splitting into useless strands. You toss it aside with a sigh, grab another from the bundle, and sharpen it once more. Clay dust settles into the folds of your tunic, your fingers ache, and you can't help thinking, tomorrow you'll be right back here, doing it all again. Yet for all the monotony, there's a quiet satisfaction in mastering these tools, in bending earth and reed into the language of your world. The clay dust might be settling on your tunic, but the work of a scribe is only warming up. After all, you aren't carving triangles for the sheer joy of making your hands ache. Your job is the invisible engine that keeps the entire Babylonian economy ticking along. Without you, the flow of barley, silver, goats, and beer would dissolve into a chaos of who owes what. Imagine thousands of farmers shouting, "I paid already," at once, and you'll see why scribes are indispensable. Your morning starts at the counting house, a long hall beside the temple where the air smells of grain, sweat, and damp clay. Merchants shuffle in, carrying jars, baskets, and contracts. Some bring cattle, their hooves clopping on the stone floor. Others drag sacks of barley so heavy the seams split, leaving trails of golden grain across the floor like breadcrumbs to a very boring fairy tale. You sit cross-legged with a tablet on your lap, stylus ready. A merchant approaches, huffing from the weight of his goods, and you begin your dance of numbers. One mark for 10 goats, another for a jar of silver, another for barley. It's like juggling, except your balls are tiny wedges that could ruin a contract if angled wrong. Here's the mainstream fact. Mesopotamia basically invented accounting. Every contract, loan, and tax collection was meticulously tracked in cuneiform. That's right, before people wrote epic poetry or love letters, they wrote receipts. Humanity's first words weren't "I love you," but "You owe me 3 jars of beer." You scrawl carefully, the clay squishing slightly under your stylus when a debate breaks out nearby. A farmer insists his goats are healthier than average and should count for more. The overseer rolls his eyes, mutters something about "a goat is a goat," and you suppress a chuckle. You just write down the number. Nobody asked for your opinion. Still, it amuses you that the ancient equivalent of "my car is worth more than the trade-in value" existed millennia ago. Not every record is dull, though. Some tablets list elaborate trade routes, merchants shipping lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedarwood from Lebanon, or copper from Oman. You feel a thrill at the idea that your wedges connect distant lands, like the world's first global spreadsheet. Historians still argue whether scribes truly understood the vast networks they recorded, or if they were just writing down numbers without grasping the bigger picture. But sitting there, pressing neat triangles into clay, you like to think you're part of something larger than yourself. Then there are the loans. Oh, the loans. A farmer borrows seed grain in spring, promising to repay after the harvest. You note the terms: interest at 1/3, due after so many months. If the harvest fails, well, let's just say the debtor might spend more time hoeing the temple fields than his own. You wonder how many lives hinged on the neatness of your wedges. One crooked symbol and someone could owe 3 goats instead of 2. No pressure. Quirky tidbit. Some tablets survive with what look like doodles of tally marks scratched into the margins, possibly by scribes double-checking their math. Imagine the first accountant scribbling, "Does this add up?" next to a loan contract. You grin at the thought. Ancient auditors existed, and they probably weren't much fun at parties either. The day stretches into afternoon, and the hall grows stifling. Dust swirls in the air, coating your tongue with grit. You wipe your forehead, glance at your tablet, and wonder if you'll ever stop dreaming in wedges. The repetition is endless, yet necessary. The economy doesn't care if your hand cramps. Somewhere outside, children laugh and splash in a canal, free from clay tablets. You sigh and press on. Occasionally, the overseer checks your work. He scans your tablet with narrowed eyes, nods once, and grunts approval. No words of praise, no good job, just a grunt. You take it as a win. After all, in a world where a single smudged wedge could mean a lawsuit, silence is the highest compliment. As the sun dips lower, the last merchants shuffle out, their contracts safely immortalized in clay. You stack your tablets, each one drying into permanence, and stretch your aching legs. The economy will keep moving tomorrow because of you. No fanfare, no applause, just the quiet pride of knowing every goat, jar, and sack is accounted for. And as you trudge home, clay dust sticking to your skin, you can't help but laugh at the absurdity. Thousands of years from now, someone in a museum will peer at your neat wedges under glass and whisper, "Look, the first accountant." The workday might be over, but your duties as a scribe don't stop at balancing goats and tallying grain. Every so often, the overseer drops a different kind of assignment in your lap, one that feels almost indulgent compared to columns of numbers. Today, you're tasked with copying a story. And not just any story, but one of those grand, sweeping epics that makes your cramped reed stylus hand feel like it's part of something bigger than ledgers and loans. You sit cross-legged on the floor of the tablet house, fresh clay balanced on your knees. The stylus hovers, and you press the first wedge. Gilgamesh. The name itself feels heavier than barley counts or temple taxes. You've heard the tale recited by priests before, sung in slow, rhythmic chants by storytellers in the square. Now, it's your job to trap those words in clay, one careful triangle at a time. The story unfolds as your stylist dances. Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, mighty but flawed. He battles Enkidu, wrestles with gods, searches for immortality. As you carve, you wonder if kings secretly squirm reading these stories. After all, not every king comes out looking wise. Historians still argue whether scribes wrote these epics as state propaganda or as subtle critiques of their rulers. You press your wedges with a tiny smirk, imagining Gilgamesh himself sitting in the audience, arms crossed, muttering, "That's not how it happened." Here's a quirky fact. Archaeologists have found practice tablets where apprentice scribes copied lines from epics but got distracted halfway through, leaving half-finished sentences or random symbols that look suspiciously like doodles. Maybe one apprentice got bored during the flood story and thought, "Nope, I'm done with this rain business." You sympathize. Writing about gods smiting humanity can be less thrilling after 4 hours of clay pressing. Yet, there's something hypnotic about the rhythm. Line after line, you feel yourself pulled into the tale, as though the wedges themselves are whispering. Your stylus taps against clay in steady beats, like a drum accompanying the narrative. Outside, donkeys bray, children laugh, merchants argue. But inside the tablet house, you're in the cedar forests with Gilgamesh, battling the great Humbaba. The best part? Every so often, the story sneaks in a detail so mundane it makes you laugh. Lists of gifts to gods, descriptions of banquets, or how many jars of beer were consumed after a battle. You pause, chuckling softly, because even in legends, it always comes back to food and drink. Maybe humanity hasn't changed that much after all. Of course, the clay has its own limits. Unlike parchment or paper, it doesn't allow for sprawling prose. You press a few lines, smooth the surface, and realize you need another tablet. The Epic of Gilgamesh stretches across a small mountain of clay, each tablet heavy enough to knock someone unconscious if dropped. You imagine a poor apprentice carrying a stack of them and tripping in the street, epic tumbling everywhere. The gods might not appreciate that. The pride in copying these stories is real. While numbers keep the city running, it's the stories that give it soul. You think of future generations, scribes like you, apprentices yet unborn, reading your careful wedges and feeling connected to the same characters. It's a strange kind of immortality, one Gilgamesh himself would have envied. The tablet dries slowly, the wedges crisp against the clay surface. You blow a little dust away, satisfied with the neatness of your work. Tomorrow, you might be back to counting goats, but tonight, you've walked beside kings and gods. You've turned soft mud into legend. And as the last light of day filters into the tablet house, you realize something quietly profound. Numbers may hold the world together, but it's stories that keep people awake. Or, in your case, gently send them to sleep.
After the intensity of palace and temple work, it's a relief to spend a day in the marketplace, observing the ebb and flow of ordinary life. You stroll through narrow streets where vendors call out their wares: baskets of figs, jars of date syrup, coils of wool, and shiny clay pots stacked precariously like miniature towers. The smell of fresh bread mixes with the tang of fish from the river, and the occasional clatter of a donkey cart makes you flinch, wishing the roads were quieter. As a scribe, your role here is subtle but crucial. You aren't just observing, you're counting, recording, and ensuring the city's economy hums. You jot down the number of goats sold, barrels of beer traded, and bundles of grain moved from one stall to another. Your wedge marks flow smoothly into clay tablets, almost like musical notation. Historians still argue whether scribes in marketplaces acted purely as recorders or sometimes influenced trades with small adjustments, favoring friends or family. You secretly hope your numbers are impartial, but you can't resist adding a tiny flourish, a wedge shaped like a little goat, just for fun.
The sights and sounds are a sensory feast. Children run barefoot between stalls, chasing stray chickens, their laughter mingling with the calls of hawkers advertising herbs, spices, and the occasional exotic fruit. You smell roasted onions sizzling over small fires and the sweet, sticky aroma of date cakes. Occasionally, a vendor waves a coin at you, trying to distract you from your tally. You shake your head, stylus in hand, amused. You may be in the middle of trade, but the temptation of bribes seems universal, even in 2000 BCE. Quirky tidbit: some tablets show scribes doodling caricatures of unruly customers, small goat-like figures with exaggerated ears, or men with absurdly large hats. You imagine your ancient counterpart snickering under his breath, thinking, someday they'll dig this up and wonder what it means. Historians still argue whether these sketches were mere boredom or subtle social commentary. You like to believe they were a bit of humor to keep the day light. You navigate past merchants bartering for cloth, sometimes stopping to note weights and measures. Scales clink and the occasional fruit topples from a basket, rolling underfoot. The rhythm of this space is different from the palace or temple. It's messy, vibrant, unpredictable. And yet, even here, scribes maintain the invisible thread of order, connecting buyers, sellers, and officials through precise records. Occasionally, you pause to watch artisans at work, potters spinning their wheels, blacksmiths hammering molten metal, and weavers threading intricate patterns. You imagine the clay of your tablets capturing their labor, silently acknowledging their craft alongside yours. You scribble a few lines for the unusual transactions, a rare copper ingot changing hands, a basket of imported figs, and think about the long chain of human effort that leads to this bustling market scene. By afternoon, the sun has warmed the narrow streets, and the smell of roasted grain and sweat fills the air. Merchants shout, children shriek, and donkeys bray as if in chorus. You carefully finish your tallies, stack the tablets, and glance at the crowd. Each wedge is a record of life, small but significant, a way to hold the chaos at bay. As you leave the marketplace, tablets clutched to your chest, you notice the shadows stretching long and thin across the streets. You can hear a distant lute playing, and someone is singing a melody about gods and kings. For a moment, you imagine yourself in a different city, a different century, performing the same work, preserving the rhythm of life in wedge-shaped script. You shake your head, smiling at the timelessness of it all, and trudge home, clay dust stubbornly sticking to your tunic. After the bustle of the marketplace, you shift focus to an aspect of daily life that is both practical and peculiar: medicine and remedies. You sit at a low wooden bench in the corner of the temple, where small jars and clay tablets line the shelves like a chaotic library of cures. The smell of herbs, dried roots, and animal fat hangs in the air, sharp and earthy. Today, your task is to copy medical lists, recording treatments, dosages, and the occasional charm intended to ward off illness. Your stylus hovers over the clay as you begin with the mainstream facts. The Babylonians had surprisingly advanced knowledge for the era. They used bandages, poultices, and even attempted surgeries like setting broken bones. Instructions are meticulous. Grind a particular herb, mix it with honey, apply at dawn, repeat 3 times. You press wedges carefully, aware that a misplaced symbol could confuse an important treatment. Historians still argue whether these remedies were actually effective or if they functioned more as ritual prescriptions to reassure patients. Quirky tidbit: some of the tablets list remedies that feel downright strange to you. A concoction for headaches calls for a mixture of onions, crocodile dung, and a whisper of incantation. You grimace slightly, imagining the smell, and then shake your head with a smile, thinking, well, at least they were inventive. Despite the oddity, these prescriptions reveal a society deeply concerned with health and well-being, blending observation with superstition in ways that seem almost charmingly human. You notice a small group of apprentices nearby, practicing the spelling of ingredients while mimicking the gestures of a healer. One of them accidentally flings powdered herb onto a tablet, smudging a perfect row of wedges.
The teacher sighs, sighing echoed by all the scribes present, and the young apprentice mutters an apology under his breath. You chuckle softly, recalling your own mistakes from years past. As the day continues, you copy lists of symptoms and remedies: fever, toothache, rashes, stomach pain. Some instructions involve massages or hot compresses. Others are purely magical, relying on chants, incantations, and ritual objects. There is a rhythm to the recording. Repetition lulls you into a gentle focus, almost like meditation. You press wedge after wedge, sometimes pausing to inhale the earthy aroma of dried herbs. Outside, the city carries on. You hear the faint bray of donkeys, the chatter of neighbors, and the splash of water from nearby canals. The contrast between the precise world of medical recording and the chaotic hum of life outside makes you smile. Life, it seems, is always a mixture of order and mess. By late afternoon, the tablets are complete. You stack them carefully, mindful of their fragile edges. Each tablet represents knowledge, sometimes practical, sometimes eccentric, always human. You step back, stretch your cramped fingers, and glance around the small workspace. The light filters softly through the reed blinds, casting long, warm shadows across the clay-strewn floor. The quiet satisfaction of the work washes over you. Tomorrow, you'll be back to counting grain or recording contracts, but today, you have preserved a small piece of Babylonian healing, blending observation, superstition, and human ingenuity in wedge-shaped permanence. You tuck your stylus away and step outside, the warm breeze brushing against your clay-stained tunic. You inhale, thinking of the smells, the sounds, the bustling city, and feel a profound connection to the tiny, persistent details that make life and history so vividly enduring. You might think that recording rituals and temple offerings is the peak of a scribe's responsibility, but your work also extends deep into politics and law. As the afternoon sun fades, you're summoned to the palace archives to copy decrees, contracts, and legal rulings. You trudge along narrow streets, clay dust coating your sandals, and pass merchants closing their stalls and children chasing stray goats. The palace feels both familiar and intimidating, a monumental mud brick structure that hums with authority. Inside, scribes bustle about, tablets clutched to their chests, voices low but urgent. Today, your task is a batch of legal contracts, sales of land, marriage agreements, and a few unusual cases that read like disputes over who gets the best goats. Your stylus hovers, ready to transform spoken words into enduring clay marks. Mistakes here aren't just embarrassing, they could affect someone's property, livelihood, or social standing. Historians still argue whether scribes had discretion in interpreting ambiguous decrees or if they merely acted as impartial recorders. Either way, your fingers tremble slightly as you begin. The contracts are precise, almost ritualistic in their wording. Each party's name, lineage, and promise must be noted accurately. One misaligned wedge could mean the difference between 2 goats and 3, which in this society is a serious deal. You marvel at the level of detail, land measurements, boundaries, the exact number of livestock, even the names of witnesses. It's like a combination of law school and accounting, with the added pressure of permanent ink, or rather, permanent clay. Quirky tidbit, archaeologists have discovered some tablets with what appear to be tiny corrections, erased wedges, scribbles, and even doodles of annoyed scribes' faces in the margins. You imagine your fellow scribes sighing mid-contract, muttering, "Yes, yes, I get it. 3 goats, now leave me alone." It's comforting to know that ancient bureaucrats had the same petty frustrations we do. As you press wedge after wedge, you notice reoccurring disputes. Neighbors squabbling over shared irrigation channels, merchants trying to claim more than their fair share of grain, even a case where a man attempted to sell his donkey twice. You suppress a laugh, imagining modern lawyers shaking their heads over the same antics. The palace archivists glance at your work, frown at a misaligned mark, and grunt in approval. That's the closest you'll get to a compliment today. Politics isn't limited to contracts, of course. Kings issue edicts on tax rates, festival dates, or military levies, and scribes are the conduit.
You copy these decrees with precision, feeling the weight of authority in every wedge. Miswriting could lead to misunderstandings, riots, or worse. You pause, imagining a confused farmer reading an incorrect tax tablet and throwing his barley into the river in protest. While you write, you notice the smell of ink lamps burning nearby and the distant clatter of guards pacing. The air is tense but rhythmic, like a quiet orchestra of administration. You trace each wedge slowly, savoring the tactile satisfaction while remaining acutely aware that this is history in motion. By evening, your stack of completed tablets grows tall, each one a permanent testament to disputes, resolutions, and social order. You feel a quiet pride. Without scribes, kings could issue decrees into a void, contracts would dissolve into arguments, and civilization would be a messy, unrecorded chaos. You brush your hands off, noting that tomorrow you'll return to this same room, same stylus, same clay, continuing the delicate balance of law, politics, and memory.